I've taught philosophy since 1998, and I love teaching philosophy. I love talking about philosophy, but more than anything, I love helping students come to understand philosophy and its importance in our world, how philosophy has made us how we are today. In all the years that I've taught philosophy, one of the chief frustrations actually has been dealing with textbooks. Several years ago, I gave up on the mass produced Introduction to Philosophy textbooks. The offerings from the big four corporate educational publishers, and that would be Cengage, McGraw Hill, Pearson, and Oxford, are overpriced. So overpriced. I cannot, in good conscience, ask my students to pay $100 or more for a book and then open themselves up to be pressured by the corporation to buy extra resources. Worse, the textbooks have been degrading in quality. Almost every year, it seems some new nonsense that they create or they eliminate something. The textbooks are full of errors, they're full of omissions, and ultimately the problem is they fail to adequately describe philosophy. And so I decided to write my own a few years ago. And after 2 years of researching and writing, I am proud to publish the result. My book is entitled How We Are and How We Got Here, A Practical History of Western Philosophy. There's a link in the description of this podcast episode where you can buy the book. And it's a fresh and original presentation that is easy for anyone to understand and see how philosophy fits in with how we are today. Philosophers have created our society. Obviously, they didn't do that alone, but most of the things that have happened in the world have been influenced by philosophers in one way or another. And so, based on my 20 plus years experience in teaching philosophy and learning what works for students, How We Are and How We Got Here is designed to connect with the readers and the students to help them understand philosophy and why it matters to them, regardless of their major, regardless of their background. And this book is basic enough to be understood by those with no prior experience with philosophy, but it's sophisticated enough to inform further those who have some knowledge of philosophy. So why did I do this and what makes this book different? Because it is different than other textbooks that are out there on the market. Well, in writing this book for use in university courses, I wanted to avoid two pitfalls of standard textbooks on philosophy. One is that ridiculous high cost of textbooks that publishing corporations expect students to pay. And the second is that standard textbooks don't adequately give students the resources they need to connect meaningfully with philosophy. And these two pitfalls are partially connected. The overuse of primary texts is confusing to students. Some instructors feel that philosophy is best taught through source material, and I respect their choice. You throw Plato's Republic and Descartes' Meditations at students, and they just, oh, go read that. And I respect that, but I have seen far too many students enter my courses who dropped out of a previous Introduction to Philosophy section, in which the instructor did just throw those texts at them and expected them to sink or swim. And these students sank and learned little to nothing. These students are not stupid, and they're not lazy. They weren't given the tools to succeed. Therefore, my book is not a reader. It's not an anthology. It's not a philosophy with readings. My book explains the philosopher's ideas. That is its role as a guide. I think that the role of a philosophy textbook is to be a secondary resource that helps instructors explain the philosopher's ideas. So, my book references the primary texts, quotes them, but doesn't reproduce them. This saves page space for explanation and discussion, while keeping costs down for the students paying for the book, because all of those readers and anthologies have to pay someone for the rights to use the text that they are reproducing. And that's part of what drives up the cost. But my book also gives instructors more freedom to add whatever primary text they deem fitting. We're not forcing the students and instructors to focus on particular sections of particular texts. Primary source texts are widely available in the public domain, and I encourage instructors to share those with students as I do in my courses. Anyone can go out and get those texts for themselves. It's free. Another key difference in my book is its emphasis on recent philosophy. And this is something that has so frustrated me for years about philosophy textbooks. Quite a few standard textbooks focus predominantly on ancient and early modern philosophy. That's philosophy before 1800. And this gives students the impression that philosophy was a pursuit of the past. Some readers' textbooks have recently added to their disjoint approach a few essays more recently written, but not in a coherent way that shows the current directions in philosophy. And most of the readings by current philosophers is simply talking about ancient philosophers. It is important to show that philosophy is an ongoing conversation that is continuing to engage with current social issues and break new ground. So my book includes philosophy's current engagement with social changes and real-life concerns, and that includes covering current movements in social philosophy, feminist philosophy, and philosophy of race, among other current issues in philosophy. How we are and how we got here includes more philosophers who are female, people of color, and non-heteronormative than probably any other textbook ever written. And I do this not as mere box checking, but acknowledging these philosophers' important roles in philosophy's effects on society. In this way, the book can show students how innovations in philosophy have interacted with and changed history, leading to how we are today. And that is another important consideration. An important lesson I have learned from teaching philosophy is the need to learn philosophy chronologically. Students benefit from learning how philosophy has developed by seeing how philosophers interacted with historical changes. And students gain understanding by appreciating how philosophers build on the ideas of their predecessors. A historical, contextual approach to philosophy avoids the disconnected and fragmented view offered by topically arranged textbooks. My book shows how throughout history, philosophy connects with real life and our everyday experiences. It looks at philosophy not as an arcane collection of disconnected questions, but as an ongoing dialogue in response to real-world problems. By presenting philosophy as a vital part of our lives, not as a set of isolated theoretical problems, we avoid the sink-or-swim approach. We avoid the fragmented silo approach of the other textbooks. It's not a hodgepodge of disjoint readings without adequate guidance, which is what's being offered by the big four publishers. We have a story. And yeah, my book is a nonfiction story, the story of the history of Western philosophy, how we became how we are. I'll also mention another pet peeve of mine, that so many of these textbooks don't cover at all, or cover woefully inadequately, some very important movements in philosophy. And these include pragmatism, which most books don't even mention, phenomenology, social and political philosophy, which is seldom mentioned other than, oh, you talk about Plato's Republic, you may mention Machiavelli, you may mention Marx, but the whole rest of the history of social and political philosophy is pretty much ignored. Postmodernism. I'm not a big fan of postmodernist philosophy, but we need to talk about it because it is important in this story of how we came to be here in the 21st century. And very importantly, my book discusses feminist philosophy, not just as a mention. I've seen so many textbooks that they'll mention in a couple paragraphs, maybe 2 pages at most, oh yeah, there's feminist philosophy. It's this idea that women have equal rights. Well, that's true, but that is a woefully inadequate way to mention feminist philosophy. I have a whole chapter on feminist philosophy, just like there's a whole chapter on the philosophy of race, which is all but completely absent from the discussion of philosophy in most textbooks and in most courses, to be fair. There is so much material that is out there that has happened within the last 50 years that comes from philosophers who gave ideas that are structuring and informing the discussions that our society is having today. And these are completely absent from other textbooks. And it's no wonder why so many people think philosophy does not matter, because we teach philosophy as though it is this arcane, weird, for its own sake, ancient practice that real people don't do anymore. Real people do philosophy, and all real people can be philosophers. So that's why I wrote the book, How We Are and How We Got Here, a history of Western philosophy that provides the reader and students of all backgrounds with a clear and whole understanding of philosophy and its role in history and society. It makes the 2,400-year history of Western philosophy vital and relevant to today. It shows that philosophy is not a cold, analytical academic procedure, but exciting and alive, and reveals how we are all philosophers.